Hey up. Right, I remember doing the comparison of the Honda GB 350 with the classic 350 from Royal Enfield. Must be about a year ago now, or getting on that way. And one thing that kept popping up in the comments on that video, and to be honest, it's popped up on numerous comments on related videos ever since, is that people prefer the character of the classic 350 to the sort of clinical perfection of the Honda GB 350, which yeah, I get where people are coming from. I think we live in an age now where you know, we're constantly getting upgrades in electronics and just manufacturing in general thrown at us. We've sort of reached the point of perfection overload, because although we're constantly promised perfection, there's no such thing as a perfect product. All you can do is strive for perfection. You never really achieve it. Now, I suppose we've got to ask ourselves, you know, what character really is. Now, in the neck of the woods where I live, it may be different elsewhere. Character is something that is attributed, it's a descriptive term for something that has a lot of flaws. It's far less than perfect, but it has redeeming features that make you love it or like it, which seems to be attributed a lot to the Indian-made motorcycles that are available to us, bikes like the classic 350 or all of the Royal Enfields for that matter, and the likes of the BSA. You know, they've got a lot of flaws. They're not the standards that we're used to, but they've got a sort of primeval character to them that makes us fall in love with them. There's part of me that sort of believes maybe some of this is the psychology of the owner, in that, you know, they know they've not bought the best product available, but it was cheap, it's the one that they've got, so they try to find redeeming features that justifies, you know, their ownership of that particular product. Now, I'm not trying to say that that's right or wrong. There is no right or wrong to this. At the end of the day, it's the individual's personality that enjoys the certain sort of attributes of whatever it is that they own. Some people may purposely go for those flaws because of this you know, perfection overload that we're constantly being subjected to. But what I'm gathering from, you know, comments on various videos, we do sort of have two camps. We have the guys who love the Honda, sorry, guys and girls that love the Honda because it reminds them of the bikes that they had in the 1970s. Whereas other people denigrate the Honda for not having the character of something like the classic 350. Now, the thing is, the Honda 350 is in a lot of ways a very faithful replica or reimagining of a 1970s machine. What you've got to remember is that companies like Honda and Suzuki, Yamaha and Kawasaki were killing the worldwide motorcycle market in the 1970s because they'd had a look at what was available. They were aware of what was available in the 1960s, and they knew they could do it better. They were far superior machines to the 1960s and 1950s predecessors. So in that respect, it does have the character of a 1970s motorcycle. They've got that off to the T. It's a faithful reproduction. The likes of the Gold Star from BSA and the classic 350, obviously they do have that feel of a 1960s machine about them, but a 1960s machine had more character, if you like, in that it was a much more primitive machine than what the Japanese were making in the 1970s. So I think, you know, if you're talking about a modern classic being a faithful reproduction of something from the past, Honda have nailed it just as Royal Enfield and BSA have nailed it, because they're styling their machines on something that was further back in the past. It wasn't as good as bikes in the 1970s. Now, that's not the only difference between the likes of Royal Enfield and BSA and, of course, Honda, which seems to be the outlier in this conversation that I see played out in comments so often. The other thing is cultural. There are cultural differences between Japanese manufacturers and Indian manufacturers. We'll start off with the Indian manufacturers. There's an expression, I believe pronounced jugad, in India, which means make do and mend. That's good enough for what we want it for. There's no drive for perfection in Indian culture. That is changing, but the main reason for that is that Indian manufacturing culture has for a long time been a circular manufacturing culture. When they got independence in 1947, I think it was, they were left with a British infrastructure, railways, manufacturing, roads, etc. They were also paid a lot of money by the British government and by other governments to help them get back on their feet. But what tended to happen is there was no reinvestment into manufacture. They just kept using tooling and machinery that had been delivered to India back in the 1950s or 1940s. It was old machinery that was worn out. So this make do and mend attitude sort of is derived from there. By the way, I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. I'm sure there'll be a lot of Indian viewers that will be more than happy to school an Englishman on how jugad is pronounced and what to their minds it really means, but it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Now, things have started to change in Indian manufacturing culture, as I say, but to all intents and purposes, circular manufacturing practices in India are still very much lodged in the psychology of most Indian people, in that you don't strive for perfection, you just strive to get it working, get it going, get it good enough so that other people will accept it. The other problem in India with manufacturing is, of course, the punitive taxes on imported goods or imported raw materials. In order to protect Indian manufacturing, the Indian government charges huge amounts of money for anything that's been imported into the country, whether it's a raw material or whether it's finished components, to make them economically unviable for the Indian market, which gives Indian manufacturers obviously a bit of an advantage. But that's a double-edged sword, because no one wants to import raw materials. Again, we go back to this circular manufacturing economy. There's a huge demand for what is a reasonably small amount of resources, but there is a huge competition in order to get those resources to build those products, and a lot of them, understandably, are recycled raw resources. So with each recycling sort of generation, the quality of those raw materials, whether it be steel, aluminium, or other metals, the quality gradually comes down step by step, year after year, and they become more expensive. It actually, it's working against a lot of the manufacturers now, because not only are they all competing for these materials, they're all paying higher prices for what are essentially low quality materials than could be imported. But that's the way it goes. This is this whole make do and mend psychology of Indian manufacturing. And then we come to Japanese manufacturers. Now, there's an expression, actually the obsession with perfection in Japan is so huge and underlying in everything that they do, that there are several words that are used to express it. But I think the most common one is kaizen, which means to, in manufacturing, you strive for perfection and you strive for constantly improving a product over time. You don't just design something that you think is the best you can do and then leave it at that. Once you start building it, you look at other ways of making it better and better and better. I think to some extent that's probably a bit of a fool's errand, but you know, that is the Japanese mentality. Zero defects are tolerated. That's the way they go in about manufacturing, and that's what, you know, throughout the 70s, 80s and 90s put Japan at the top in the world when it comes to manufacturing. Now, to some extent, because of rising costs, especially for labour in Japan, they've now had to start farming it out, the manufacture out, to other developing countries in order, you know, to pay low labour rates to get the cost of their products down. Otherwise, they will become uncompetitive. But you know, it's still very much ingrained in Japanese manufacturing mentality, is that you must build the absolute best product you possibly can without compromise. And you know, it's even got to the stage now where it comes to a lot of products which were, you know, previously considered to be artisanal or of no consequence. You know, Japanese denim, for example, is considered to be the best quality denim you can buy because of this constant striving for perfecting a product beyond the point that anybody else has bothered to perfect it to. And this is a country where they don't have any indigenous cotton species. They have to either import the very best cotton they can get their hands on in order to be able to weave the very best denim, or they've actually started up projects and plantations for growing their own cotton in a climate which is totally unsuitable for growing cotton. But that's the lengths that the Japanese go to provide the best possible product that money can buy. Now, when it comes to Honda in India, again, this comes down to the punitive levies on imported goods. For Honda to build motorcycles in Japan or anywhere else for that matter, and then import them into India, which is a huge motorcycle market, those bikes would just become uncompetitive because of the taxes that had to be paid when they're imported into the country. So I think it was back in the 1990s they teamed up with, off the top of my head, I think it was it Hero Motor Bajaj or Hero Motor, one of the two, and they started a cooperation there where Hondas were built under license. Back in the early 2000s, Honda opened up their own manufacturing plants in India, and that is basically to get around, you know, these import problems, pushing the cost of the motorcycles up. Now, to a large extent, obviously, Honda runs into the same problems. It's a conflict with their cultural norms when they opened a factory in India, for a start. The majority of the staff are going to be Indian, so they've got this Jugaad mentality of, you know, why do it better than is good enough. And they've got the same problems with the circular manufacturing economy, in that they're constantly having to buy in recycled products at a high price, which might compromise their manufacturing ethos. Now, the way Honda have got around this is by implementing Japanese staff in all the management and higher management levels at the Indian Honda factory. So they've got the Kaizen mentality, if you like, or Kaizen, it's Kaizen, not Kaizen, Kaizen mentality, overseeing the Jugaad mentality, where I'm sure there are a lot of conflicts there in the two different cultures. But by doing that, what they're able to do is be very selective about what raw materials and finished components they use, and they're also able to constantly train and coach the staff into building to specifications that are expected from Honda worldwide, because they don't just sell those bikes in India. Those bikes are also sold in Australia and New Zealand, I believe, because of, you know, geographical locations. But when it came to building stuff like the GB350 for Europe and the UK, what they chose to do was build those bikes in Japan, at one of the Japan manufacturing plants. It made sense. They already had the manufacturing available there because they've been building the GB350 for the Japanese market for some time. Now, they did import the GB350C, or they still do, but again, in some respects, those bikes did fall short of customer expectations in Japan, which is probably why they've elected not to export it to the UK and Europe for the time being, until they found a solution to that problem. But, you know, at the end of the day, they're building a machine which, to the Indian customer, obviously doesn't have the character they expect, because they are used to riding bikes that were essentially, you know, going back 10 plus years ago, they were essentially 1950s and 1960s machines that were just still being built. Now, you know, when they've sort of gone on to the J series platforms for the 350s, they have taken another step in the direction of what the Western world expects. But I remember there has been a lot of pushback from Indian customers. I know when the unit construction engine was introduced for the 350 and 500cc models back in 2009, I think it was, there was enormous criticism that they had lost the character of the original Bullet architecture. And it was something, you know, Royal Enfield thought that they'd managed to build that into that bike, but a lot of customers just didn't like it. So I'm not saying that one of these is right and one of them is wrong. It all comes down to the individual's perspective and what they want from a machine. And I would love to hear from people, you know, their reasons for favouring, you know, the character of Royal Enfield over the clinical perfection of the Honda riding experience. It's down to what, you know, the individual wants. If we were all the same, it wouldn't be a very interesting world, would it? But it's clear that there is a huge division, and I would say it's a 50-50 split in the comments of various videos, that you know, half of the viewers really love the Honda and what it represents to them as people that were probably riding back in the 1970s, and that it recaptures that 1970s boom era of motorcycles. And then there are others that favour the slightly archaic characteristics of the Royal Enfields. Although I would say, you know, you compare a J series Royal Enfield to the previous generation, and they are far more sort of clinical and refined than that model was, without a doubt. But that was probably down to Royal Enfield knowing that what they wanted to do was sell their bikes further afield. It wasn't just, you know, they had to keep their Indian customers happy, but they also had to produce something that was more acceptable to the rest of the world. But yeah, I mean, there's no right or wrong to this argument. It's down to the individual and what they prioritise as being important to them. But I just thought I would make this video to try and sort of explain these differences and why these differences are there, because a lot of it is cultural and political. You know, Honda strive for perfection in as far as it's affordable perfection, and they're constantly trying to you know, up the ante each time they build a bike, and they're going through that manufacturing process. Whereas, you know, we've seen Royal Enfield reach a pinnacle about 3-4 years ago, where they were doing things really, really well. But I have noticed, especially when it comes to things like finish and paintwork, that over the last 2 or 3 years it has slid back slightly, and that Jagad attitude has sort of taken over and said, yeah, okay, you know, we can do it perfect like that, but that costs more money and it takes more time. So you know, that's good enough. That will be how we go forward with it from here on. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. I mean, I've actually put about a year's research into this video, and I've never sort of pulled the plug on it because it's such a huge, nuanced subject, and it's a confusing subject to put into words as well. I hope I've done it justice. I think the main reason today I was a little bit stuck with the bank holiday, etc. I couldn't do the filming, so I've had to sort of slot this in and hope that it's good enough. I hope you've enjoyed it, and you know, it will give you some food for thought so that you can come back at me and tell me your thoughts on the two different styles, if you like, of manufacturing. Once again, thanks so much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope that you will leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're not already a subscriber. I do appreciate it. There are other ways you can help via PayPal donations or my Patreon subscriptions, or you can leave a little donation in the super thanks button down below. I am of course going to be back on Friday, where I'll hopefully be a little bit better organised than I was today. So until then, ride safely, and I'll see you soon.